Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today, so let's get straight into today's stories, specifically coming out of Monday Night Raw last night. And let's start off with that ending of Monday Night Raw that saw Randy Orton RKO Alexa Bliss during her Raw Women's Championship match against Asuka. Now, this week's Royal Rumble Go Home edition of Monday Night Raw saw a main event between Alexa Bliss and Asuka for the Raw Women's Championship, but it ended with Randy Orton hitting the RKO on Alexa Bliss. Now, as I mentioned, the Go Home Raw main event saw Bliss challenge WWE Women's Tag Team Champion Asuka for her Raw Women's Championship. The match included strong performances from champion and challenger, mind games from Alexa Bliss. This included several transformations by Alexa Bliss, transforming back and forth from her darker side to her previous goddess iteration of the character. But then right when it looked like Alexa Bliss was about to put Asuka away with the sister Abigail to land the Raw Women's Championship after using the mandible claw, Randy Orton suddenly entered the ring from behind and dropped Alexa Bliss with the RKO as she turned around. Raw then went off the air with Randy Orton standing over Alexa Bliss while she was laid out in the middle of the ring. Now, this was Randy Orton's payback on Alexa Bliss after the Fireball attack that closed Monday Night Raw 2 weeks ago when Randy Orton faced off against Triple H in the main event. Bliss and Randy Orton have been feuding for several weeks as part of Randy Orton's ongoing feud with the Fiend Bray Wyatt, who of course has been off of television since losing the Firefly Inferno match to the Viper at the WWE TLC pay-per-view event in December. Now, it had been reported previously that Randy Orton versus The Fiend would take place in a Firefly Funhouse match at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view on Sunday, but that match was not announced during tonight's Go-Home edition of Monday Night Raw. Now, it's obviously possible that WWE could announce it at some point this week, but as of right now, at the time of recording, Randy Orton is still listed as a participant in the 30-man Royal Rumble match, but there's no word as of yet if he will be pulling double duty on Sunday night, as is the case with several WWE superstars during that event. Now, personally, again, I mentioned this before. We've spoken about this before here on the channel. We've spoken about the Randy Orton feud with Alexa Bliss and The Fiend. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was an excellent way to end Raw. I enjoyed the match between Asuka and Alexa Bliss. I know some people don't like the darker side of Alexa Bliss, that she no-sells the offense from Asuka, but to me, like I've said several times, that's the gimmick. Once you get into that Fiend territory, the whole point is that you're this supernatural dominant monster, and Alexa Bliss is just an extension of that. While The Fiend has been absent from WWE television for about a month, he has been technically there vicariously through Alexa Bliss. I think that's the point there, isn't it? That we all know The Fiend is coming back. For the last few weeks, though, we've seen The Fiend manifest himself through Alexa Bliss. That's the point. So I didn't have a problem with that. I thought the ending was great. I've seen some people mock Randy Orton's makeup that he was wearing, the burn. They tried to give it a look that Randy Orton was still suffering the burn effects from the Fireball a couple of weeks ago. I didn't think it looked too bad. You know, is it going to look perfect? No, this is WWE Monday Night Raw television after all. They've got a 50-50 record when it comes to prosthetics. I think the best WWE prosthetic job was Eric Bischoff, right, with the wedding of Billy and Chuck on SmackDown back in 2002. But the worst was also Cowboy Bob Orton during SummerSlam 2005 against Randy Orton, ironically. So I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think it was that bad. What I thought was excellent was the RKO. I mean, Alexa Bliss took an RKO like an absolute champ. Man, it was a vicious RKO, and it should be a vicious RKO. If you look in the logic of this storyline, Alexa Bliss threw fire in the face of Randy Orton. She forced him to wear a mask for a week. He's got burns on his face. Now, they said they were first-degree burns, but you never know. There could be some scarring there in the purpose of the storylines, of course. So why wouldn't he be really angry and drop Alexa Bliss with a vicious RKO? That's the point. So I thought it was excellent. I thought it was excellent. Again, I know some people don't like this storyline. I know some people don't like the supernatural, magical elements of professional wrestling. I loved it. My only complaint is that we had to wait 3 hours through a very, very dull episode, once again, of Monday Night Raw to get to this segment. Was it worth it? I don't think anything's worth sitting through some of the things we sat through last night, but what I did really enjoy was the closing segment of the show. I thought it was excellent. So I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. Let's move on, because also what we saw last night on Monday Night Raw was technically the return of Edge, because it was randomly announced during the show that Edge was going to be appearing on Monday Night Raw and giving an update on his future, and subsequently Edge did appear in a taped vignette, a taped promo, where he announced he would be making his in-ring return at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view on Sunday night. Now, last night's go-home edition of Raw saw Edge deliver a pre-recorded promo where he announced that he will be returning to action in the 30-man Royal Rumble match on Sunday. There are now 14 open spots for the 30-man Royal Rumble match. Edge joins the list of Daniel Bryan, WWE United States Champion Bobby Lashley, AJ Styles, Randy Orton, Otis, The Miz, Jey Uso, Cesaro, Jeff Hardy, Shinsuke Nakamura, Sami Zayn, SmackDown Tag Team Champion Dolph Ziggler, WWE Intercontinental Champion Big E, Sheamus, and John Morrison as confirmed entrants. Now, of course, Edge has been out of action since suffering a torn triceps during his loss to Randy Orton at the 2020 Backlash pay-per-view in the greatest wrestling match ever. Edge, of course, came out of retirement last year at the 2020 Royal Rumble. He then made his in-ring return to singles action at WrestleMania 36, where he defeated Randy Orton in a last man standing match. Now, that's obviously quite surprising, all of this, because it came out of nowhere. It really did come out of nowhere. WWE didn't announce this beforehand. They didn't announce that Edge was going to appear on the show. They just randomly announced it, I think during the first hour or the second hour. By the way, it's just been confirmed we're going to hear from Edge tonight. Now, this might sound really hypocritical because I've been championing and campaigning for weeks at this point, or months, or years, saying that everything doesn't need to be announced ahead of time. Some of the greatest moments are things that are unannounced. Some of the greatest things that have ever happened in WWE history, some of the best moments, like Edge's return last year, came when it was unannounced. So it might seem silly that I'm saying that they should have been announced ahead of time, but I just find it surprising that WWE wouldn't do that. Look, WWE, when it comes to Raw, they are struggling for ratings, and they do need rating boosts and bumps whenever they can get them. That's why we had Raw Legends Night at the start of the year. So I was surprised to see that they didn't ahead of time just say, look, Eddie's going to be appearing on the show tonight, and they didn't obviously announce what he was going to say, but I thought they might do that, but I'm surprised they didn't. I think in this case, the irony being the amount of times they announce things ahead of times when they shouldn't, but this time they didn't, and it wasn't worth it. They should have announced it ahead of time, in my opinion. Now, I've seen some people also criticising, saying, they should have left this for the Royal Rumble. They should have just had Edge be a surprise entrant to the Royal Rumble. I disagree. Usually, I would agree with stuff like that. I would say big surprises, returns from injuries should be in the Royal Rumble. Edge's return last year was a great moment because of the surprise nature of it. They could have announced it ahead of time. They didn't, and it was the right call. I don't think this year that is the right call to leave it as a surprise entrant, because it would come across like you're trying to repeat what happened last year, and you have to leave last year to what it was. Last year's surprise entrance for Edge in the Royal Rumble was one of the greatest Royal Rumble returns of all time, one of the greatest returns in WWE history, one of the greatest moments in WWE history. There's no point trying to replicate that, and I think if they left it as a surprise and Edge came out again and they tried to do a second take, if you will, of what happened last year, it would have come across as them trying to recreate something that was so magical and special a year later, and I don't think they need to do that. Now is the time for a different story. Edge is returning from a different injury. We know he's cleared to compete. It's not a miraculous recovery this time. It's a different story to be told. So I think it was the right call to have Edge announce it on Raw. I'm just not sure if it was the right call to not announce that Edge was going to be appearing on Raw. I think Raw could have benefited from that. Certainly would have driven up some interest going into the show. Nevertheless, now that Edge is going to be in the Royal Rumble match on Sunday, it does make you wonder, have we got another favourite for the Royal Rumble match? I think it's certainly up there, because for me, it looks like at this point, the Randy Orton Fiend feud is going to continue for a while. Obviously, there had been rumours and reports we were going to get Edge versus Randy Orton 3 at WrestleMania. I still think that's probably the case, but depending on where this Fiend and Randy Orton storyline goes, this could be extended for a while. And if you saw Edge's promo on Monday night, he basically said, look, 10 years ago, and it is 10 years ago, WrestleMania 27, I came into that event world champion. I won. I opened WrestleMania. I won the match against Alberto Del Rio, retained the World Heavyweight Championship, and a week later, I had to relinquish it and retire. It's a great story to say 10 years later, can I win the Royal Rumble, go back to the same event that I retained my World Championship that I never lost, and once again be standing on top of the mountain. That's a possibility. Possibly a Drew McIntyre versus Edge WWE Championship match at WrestleMania. That's interesting, because you've got the story of 10 years later, Edge possibly getting the World Championship once again that he never lost. That is very interesting. So I think Edge might be a favourite now for the Rumble, and I would not be against whatsoever an Edge versus Drew McIntyre match at WrestleMania. We've been pleading, clamouring, saying since Edge returned we want to see him face the guys he's never really faced before. And I don't know if he's probably faced Drew McIntyre. I think he's probably shared the ring with him, I would have thought, considering that they do overlap slightly, but not this Drew McIntyre. Not this version of Drew McIntyre. And Edge would put McIntyre over at WrestleMania, I have no doubt about it, and it would make McIntyre a bigger star. So I'd be really interested in that match. Really, really interested in that match. And I hope it happens. So I wouldn't be against Edge winning the Royal Rumble whatsoever. And I'm excited to see that he's going to be back. Speaking of Drew McIntyre as well, we had the confrontation between Drew McIntyre and Goldberg on Raw last night before the Royal Rumble on Sunday, where Drew McIntyre defends the WWE Championship. Essentially, the segment was, it opened the show like I predicted in the preview last night. Drew McIntyre comes out, cuts a promo, said it's great to be back. He gets interrupted by Mr. Money in the Bank, The Miz, and John Morrison. This then leads to Goldberg interrupting them all, gets in the ring, they have a face-off. Miz and John Morrison are on the apron. They're trying to goad Drew McIntyre and Goldberg into facing off, fighting each other, weakening each other, so maybe The Miz can cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase on Sunday. This then leads to Goldberg and Drew McIntyre throwing John Morrison and The Miz into the ring. Goldberg then spears The Miz. Drew McIntyre hits the Claymore on John Morrison, and then they have another face-off as the segment ends. I thought the segment was fine. Obviously, as I mentioned in the preview, there is no real story. There is not really any story between Drew McIntyre and Goldberg, apart from, I think Drew McIntyre did a decent job in his promo of hyping up, Goldberg's got a new streak, and I think that was quite clever, because I've mentioned before, what real reason has Goldberg got to challenge for the WWE Championship? They kind of gave us a reason, I suppose, in that he has a new streak since he's returned to WWE. Every time he's returned and faced a world champion, he's won. My concern is that WWE might look at that streak and go, that ain't a bad streak to continue. We love a streak in this company. We love to break a streak, but we need to put more stock in the streak before we can break it. I wouldn't be surprised if Goldberg won. I really wouldn't. I hope it's not the case, but I really wouldn't be surprised. So I felt they did a decent job of McIntyre trying to build something into it. There still really is no issue. Goldberg's challenge at the end of Raw Legends Night when he said, "You're disrespecting legends," I still don't see that. That still is very, very confusing to me, but nevertheless, I thought the segment was fine. I do think the match sells itself. It doesn't necessarily need an issue. I would prefer it to have an issue because I think every match is better when you have a storyline built around it. But I mean, as the days draw closer to the Royal Rumble on Sunday, I mentioned before, anything can and will happen when it comes to this, and I wouldn't be surprised in either outcome. I think McIntyre will retain, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if Goldberg won. Anything can and will happen when it comes to WWE and this WWE Championship picture and this WrestleMania card. We've spoken about it here on the channel. WWE doesn't have a clue what they're going to be doing for WrestleMania this year. It changes every 5 seconds. Vince McMahon changes his mind every 5 seconds, so anything can and will change between now and WrestleMania. So that's going to be interesting to say the least. There was a weird botch last night on Monday Night Raw when it comes to a 6-man tag team match with Shayna Baszler, Nia Jax, and Lacey Evans going up against Dana Brooke, Mandy Rhodes, and Charlotte Flair. Again, it was the same last week. I criticised Raw last week when I said that there was a lot of production problems or botches during that show, and it was no different during last night's edition of Raw. This is slightly off topic, but there was a backstage segment with R-Truth and involving AJ Styles and Amos, but as they're following R-Truth, the camera's sort of panning around, and you can see AJ Styles is just standing there waiting for his cue to go into the scene, and it just seemed really odd, really odd. Just stuff like that keeps creeping into Raw at the moment, and I can't figure out why. For a publicly traded billion-dollar company that is so slick when it comes to production, Raw's had a lot of production hiccups recently, and it's been very, very strange. But going back to this 6-person tag team match, there was a shoot count-out finish during the 6-woman tag team match on Monday's WWE Royal Rumble Go Home edition of Raw on the USA Network. The match saw Mandy Rose, Dana Brooke, and WWE Women's Tag Team Champion Charlotte Flair go up against Nia Jax, Shayna Baszler, and Lacey Evans. The 6-woman match was made after Flair versus Baszler in singles action ended in a DQ due to interference from Jax, and then of course they extended the segment because they're trying to fill that time on Raw. They went to a 6-woman tag team match, but the 6-woman tag team match ended awkwardly in a count-out as Flair was bringing Baszler back into the ring. PW Insider has since reported that the referee legitimately counted Baszler out after the bow. The winners regrouped as Evans yelled at the referee for the countout, Raw then went to a commercial break and came back with another version of the six-woman match back underway. While the six-woman match was restarted, WWE aired a video that showed WWE official Adam Pearce coming out during the commercial break. WWE was forced to send Adam Pearce out there to improvise and order the referee to restart the match after the heels complained. The match then went on for several more minutes and ended with the heels getting the win after Jax pinned Dana Brooke with a very, very, very stiff chokeslam that's certainly been making the rounds on social media. So speaking of Dana Brooke, obviously there was a lot of concern on social media and backstage over the condition of Dana Brooke after she took that rough chokeslam bump from Nia Jax. PW Insider, though, has since reported that Dana Brooke was said to be 100% okay after the match and is expected to compete on Sunday at the Royal Rumble. So when it comes to the countout, look, that's the edict when it comes to WWE and referees. They're told if someone's shoulders are down to the mat for 3 seconds, you count them. If they kick out too late, too bad. If they don't get back in the ring before 10, too bad. And we've seen that in AEW be the opposite. We've seen in AEW sometimes they do a slower count. Sometimes they let them come back in the ring before the 10 because they're so concerned about not screwing up the finish. Ultimately, I prefer the WWE way of doing it because it does add some legitimacy to it. It is old school. But if you're out the ring for a 10 count, those are the rules. They're trying to at least keep it looking like it's a bit legitimate. You know what I mean? So you do, because of that edict, you do have some weird botch finishes, but ultimately that's the talent's fault. It's not the referee's fault. That's the talent's fault. They need to be paying more attention. They need to kick out. They need to get in the ring. So I didn't have a problem with that. What I did have a problem with was the Dana Brooke chokeslam spot when it comes to Nia Jax. Obviously, Nia Jax has this reputation, right? Certainly, I don't know when it comes to workers, but certainly with fans on social media, that she's reckless, that she's stiff, that she's dangerous in the ring. And there have been multiple injuries that back up those claims, whether it's Becky Lynch getting a broken face, Charlotte Flair getting injured, I think Bayley got injured, she hurt her shoulder. There have been multiple circumstances and times that Nia Jax has injured. Obviously, I would think accidentally. Kairi Sane was one last year when she split her head open being thrown into the steel ring steps, where people have said justifiably so, Nia Jax is dangerous or reckless. My opinion on it's always been the same. Is Nia Jax reckless or dangerous in the ring? I don't think she's reckless. I think that if she was reckless and people wouldn't want to work with her. I think people do want to work with her. Is she in maybe more of a comfortable position due to her family heritage? Maybe. I think that probably does lend some credence to it. But my issue when it always comes to Nia Jax is she is incredibly strong. She's arguably the largest female performer on the roster. And when she was in NXT and she was doing those WWE Performance Center combine strength tests and all that kind of stuff, she broke all kinds of powerlifting and strength records. She is legit. She is an incredibly, incredibly strong person, an incredibly strong superstar. My issue with Nia Jax is I just don't think she knows her own strength. That means she can be dangerous in the ring. Because when you don't know your own strength, when you're throwing people into steps, when you're throwing people into the canvas, when you're punching people in the face, you don't know how hard you're hitting or throwing. And I know it's not ballet, but ultimately your opponent puts their trust into you because they're putting their body and their health into your hands. And the injuries, they do stack up. And eventually, when does it become a problem? I think, frankly, it probably should have become a problem a long time ago. I'm sure people will have had discussions with Nia Jax going, seriously, lighten up. And you have to figure out your strength in this situation. And I think that was the case last night. Every single time these injuries or these spots take place, it's a case of when something slightly goes wrong, and because Nia Jax doesn't know her strength, she slams him into the floor really hard, or there's a slight misstep and she throws him into the steps hard. That's what happened with Kairi Sane. Or there's a slight zigzag and she punches Becky Lynch in the face and she doesn't know her own strength. Ultimately, it always comes down to Nia Jax not knowing her own strength. That's the issue. That's the issue right there, in my opinion. Does that make her reckless? I don't think so. Does that make her dangerous? I think it does. And it is something that needs to be addressed because it's constant. And look, social media, I know social media, once they get something between their teeth, they are relentless and they will continue to go with it. But the evidence is there. And look, I've never said that I think she's reckless because I don't think she is. Is she dangerous? I think she is. I do think she is. I think she doesn't know her own strength. And I think that's a massive issue when it comes to Nia Jax. Speaking of the Royal Rumble as well, we're going to have some big Royal Rumble announcements on WWE Backstage this week, because there's going to be some big Royal Rumble match reveals during Saturday's special edition of WWE Backstage on FS1. Fox has announced that the 30th entrant for the men's Royal Rumble match will be revealed during Saturday's show. The number 1 and number 2 entrants for the women's Royal Rumble match will also be announced during the show. As previously reported, WWE Backstage on FS1 will return on Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern for one night only as a Royal Rumble preview. A replay will air later that night at midnight, and another replay will air at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Royal Rumble Sunday as a lead-in to the Royal Rumble kickoff pre-show. The show will be hosted by Renee Paquette, Paige, and WWE Hall of Famer Booker T. There are currently 15 open spots for the Royal Rumble match. We mentioned those earlier. There are also 18 open spots for the 30-woman Royal Rumble match. Of course, WWE Backstage, this is the return, as it aired from November 2019 through mid-March of 2020. After production was stopped due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Fox Sports then announced in June that the show was no longer airing. A special post-SmackDown edition of the show was scheduled to air back in October 23, but it was nixed at the last minute and replaced with an airing of Talking Smack. Saturday's show will be the first Backstage episode to air since last year. So we're going to get some Royal Rumble information on Saturday, which is certainly going to be interesting. I would think, because they're announcing the 30th entrant and the first and second entrant, I would assume they're not going to be big surprises. Maybe when it comes to the 30th entrant for the men's Royal Rumble match, they might announce a return. I doubt it. It could be Edge. That might be a case of getting Edge on the show to hype up. That would be interesting. It might be Randy Orton. I don't know. I would be stunned if they announce, oh, the Fiend is going to be the 30th entrant in the Royal Rumble. I really don't think that's going to be the case, and I think it'll be the same with the Women's Royal Rumble. I'd be stunned if they announced that, oh, 1 is Bianca Belair and 2 is Lita, or something like that. I just can't see them doing that, but it adds some legitimacy to the product, and I think that's a lot of fun. And finally, on a more somber note, it's been announced that Vince McMahon's brother Rod McMahon has unfortunately passed away. Roderick Rod McMahon III passed away at the age of 77 last Wednesday, January 20. Rod was the only sibling to WWE Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon. Now, the cause of death for Rod is unknown at this time, according to F4W Online. You can read his legacy.com obituary at a link which we'll post in the description box below. Rod, of course, was not involved in the pro wrestling business like his younger brother, their father, and their grandfather, but he attended some WWE events at times, including the WWE Hall of Fame. Rod was a member of the United States Air Force and was stationed in Germany, where he met his wife Janice. The couple founded North American Metals Inc. in 1987 and ran the Steel, Custom Forging and Special Metals Distribution Company out of Houston, Texas. McMahon is survived by he and Vince's mother, Victoria, his wife Janice, and their 2 sons, in addition to grandchildren and Vince and Linda McMahon's children, Stephanie McMahon, Shane McMahon, and their families. So, of course, commiserations and prayers and sympathies go to the McMahon family. As I mentioned, Rod McMahon wasn't involved in the pro wrestling business. The only appearance that he was scheduled to make, actually, was at the Vince McMahon funeral episode of Monday Night Raw back in 2007. Of course, that whole angle was Vince McMahon going into the exploding limo, and there was going to be a 3-hour tribute/funeral episode to Vince McMahon, the character, on Monday Night Raw, and Rod McMahon was scheduled for that show. Obviously, that show never happened because of the events of the Chris Benoit tragedy. That show then turned into the Chris Benoit tribute show, and obviously we know the story about that, but that was the only appearance that Rod McMahon was ever supposed to make on WWE television, and of course it never happened. But as I previously mentioned, sympathies, prayers, and thoughts go to the McMahon family. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, all things pro wrestling here on the channel, so be sure to get involved in the community below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.